Junjunwala. So let me start with a quick introduction about myself. I'm Shravant Aluru, one of the founders and the CEO of an AI startup called Avatar.ai. And as a quick background, I started my roots at IIT Bombay. This was early 2000s. Went on to start my professional journey at Microsoft. This was early 2000s. AI was still called fuzzy AI. Many people probably don't know that AI existed. But it was obviously not as intelligent, did not have the agency that we see today. From there on, I went on to do my MBA at Wharton. Spent about 6 years as a tech investment banker, starting in Wall Street. Early 2010s, saw Google and DeepMind happen right in front of my eyes. So I do think destiny at some level knew my fate before I did. Kept coming back to this inflection points that I had to witness firsthand. And from there on is where Avatar's inception started. For the last 11 years now, we've been working with enterprise companies globally, predominantly in the US, but equally in some of the geographies, including India. And what we've been trying to do is help companies shift from the erstwhile deterministic way of business models to an AI native future. That vision is clearly here now as we'll see. And a little bit on the company, we've raised about 55 million from Sequoia Capital, led our Series A, Sequoia and Tiger Global led our Series B, and we've kind of invested a lot of that capital into what you see on the second bullet, which is we've spent about 10 years doing R&D. The first 4 or 5 years felt very slow, I must say. This was 2014 to 19ish, the pre-ChatGPT era, but that gave us the needed effort to have compounded Saraswati, in lack of better words, right? Be able to actually look at what is the gap between, say, a foundational capability that AI unlocks, and how do you bridge that gap to what the industry actually needs, and how do you convert that capability into, say, a productivity unlock, if you will, at the state level, at an organizational level, at an individual level, honestly, as we look forward. We're today multi-modal, so we can do text, we can do videos, we can do images, we can do PDFs. There's no real limitation in terms of the input modality or the output modality. And recently, very proud to say that we're one of the 12 foundational model startups that the government of India, as part of the India AI mission, has. It's been very exciting to be part of that great shared purpose. I did see Shri Abhishek Singh ji talk about the mission, and we're very inspired in being part of that as a small foot soldier, if you will. The one thing that we've kind of done, as you can see in the logos, is actually work across multiple different industry and domain contexts, right? Think of retail to healthcare, to manufacturing, to supply chain, to logistics, whatnot. And all of these kind of very, very diverse domain specializations, what we've kind of seen is there is a clear why as to why AI is probably important and here and now today. And that's what this slide kind of captures. I'll probably focus the first 5 minutes of my talk more around painting the picture as to what we're seeing today in AI. And then I'll actually maybe be more personalized to your objectives, which is how can incubators actually think about, in that evolving future, help your startups, help them actually thrive rather than struggle with the challenges that I'll touch upon. But just at a simpler level, right? Every business today is sitting with a manually led, deterministic business model. What I mean by that is most businesses that we've architected in the last couple of decades are all driven by rules. These are deterministic rules, and they're by a lot of places where you need agency, right? The human agency was the only answer, and therefore we see large organizations with probably not the most efficient workflows and processes. And that's where the operational efficiency lies. We're seeing that bringing AI as an AI plus human to these processes really makes a human superhuman. And what I mean by that is, it's not just about one employee becoming superhuman, but the intelligence is probably learning from various different parts of the organization and having an emergent intelligence happen, which I'll touch a couple of analogies so that you can understand. And what that does is bring non-linearity, right? You can today decouple demand and supply in ways that you couldn't with the deterministic business model. And I think that's probably the most important unlock in the degree of freedom that we today see with the work that we're doing. It also is a competitive advantage to understand these systems are self-learning. So with every usage that happens, with every human in any part of your organization using a co-pilot, you could actually convert that into a compounding data mode. And out of that compounding, accruing data, you could actually convert that into intelligence, which then becomes a true competitive advantage, which is a self-fulfilling virtuous cycle rather than the other way around. And all of this, obviously, for long-term value. All CEOs like me are finally sitting with the fiduciary responsibility of creating shareholder value, and there's a very clear opportunity there, right? I'll just quickly show you a couple of things that we do at a what level, right? We talked about the why. Let's now go in the Simon Sinek way of looking at why, what, how. Here are a couple of examples. What you see here is a pricing analysis where, say, me as an employee is trying to price a new launch of a bike. What the AI employees that you see, now what you see here is 7 different AI employees and stages where humans come in the loop. The AI employees are actually doing competitive analysis. They're going to the web, looking at all the different competitive launches that are in play, the pricing sensitivity, and eventually, as you can see here, allow a human to say, if I reduce the price by 10%, what would be the impact on my revenue? Much more intelligent in minutes versus weeks that it used to take some of our clients to do this. I'll probably go to this. But another example, think of a marketing kind of use case where there were months that someone would spend in either launching a new product or say actually customer acquisition at its basic level. What you see here is a live marketing co-pilot where the first part is analytics. It's about understanding everything that's happened and how do you convert that into actionable insights for your next campaign. And then you see me actually creating a new campaign altogether by just interacting with the co-pilot that not only actually strategize on what's the best narrative, but then goes further ahead in creating the actual collateral, as you can see. And as I said, we are multi-modal, so what you see here is input images getting converted into video. We're actually putting this out as part of the India AI Fed Summit. It'll be free for all to try. So it's something that you can look forward to as the Fed Summit that comes up. But in the interest of time, I do want to go to now how, right? Because that's honestly where you can support your startups in ways that help them differentiate themselves from tactics that were erstwhile deterministic in their DNA to tactics that perhaps will be more suited for the AI native future that's ahead of us. And what you see here is what we actually do. We call it a central organizational brain, but the first thing that we do with our clients is to say, hey, can we actually put a brain that's horizontal? It has persistent memory. What I mean by memory is every human usage is something it learns from and remembers. Every historical data point that we get on day one is equally being put in as intelligence on day one, so that there's the accuracy that you start with. It has to be production grade. I mean, we are not talking about things that can hallucinate here. These are mostly mission critical use cases. Think of a healthcare insurance claim kind of a scenario. There's actually a life and death kind of scenario in that mission criticality of that workflow, right? So, and the last thing is high scale. I mean, if you were to take a 1.8 trillion parameter OpenAI model, it would be very difficult for you to spend the inference costs that are required if you're thinking about, say, millions of transactions or inferences per month. And that's where I think India has a huge role that I'll touch upon. We're doing this as part of the India AI mission, where India could do what ISRO did to space tech, bring efficiency as the true dimension, maybe not compete to be the first to land in Mars, but when it comes to putting a satellite in the orbit and getting your mobile connections to that satellite, we are probably the cheapest in the world today. And that's probably a dimension that, thank you, to India, right? But that's effectively what I think is an opportunity, even in the AI space, which is how do we think about distilling models down to hyper-efficient, such that, say, a farmer at the last mile is able to afford it. If you give them a 1.8 trillion parameter model, might as well accept that the adoption won't happen. But that's effectively the insight to action switch. There are multiple new degrees of freedoms that are getting unlocked with this AI agency. The first, as I said, was non-linearity, but think about being not just accessing data, but acting on it. Not just accessing tools, but acting on it. Multiple different grunt work that humans needed to do, today probably just need to review. And a lot of things that humans didn't have the time to do is something that you can now offer for your employees to start thinking about. And that's honestly what we call as deterministic to an agency with AI shift, if you will, from a business model perspective. And this wanted to show a couple of analogies before I get into how you guys can help take some of this learning into the startups that you're helping nurture, if you will. In a BFSI case, think about, say, marketing as one workflow and risk and underwriting, right? Marketing is pushing volumes. Risk and underwriting is focused on protecting the loss ratios. And what happens is, while these two workflows are independent and maybe different employees are participating in those human-in-the-loop chains, the central intelligence is actually looking at both, understanding every action that a human is making, and evolves it to saying growth plus risk. Not just growth, not just risk. And in that process, you'd probably see that the brain will have emergent capabilities coming of being able to figure out the channels or the segments that actually drive profitable growth. Now that's something that as silos, I think Dr. Singh said, silos, we call it silos to Sangam, which is effectively why have these fragmented areas of intelligence, why not have a central intelligence layer that's able to connect the dots and hopefully have emergent capabilities coming out of it. Right? I'll take another example, manufacturing, right? You have sales, which is again about optimizing revenue. On the right side, say you have production planning, which is about how do you service, so demand and supply, in other words. And we all know that finally for profit and the shareholder value aspect, we want the demand and the supply to be co-linked. And that's what the central intelligence starts doing. It starts learning the demand signals at some level, and eventually that could start minimizing your costs or stock outs and things like those, right? But that's just a little bit of an example of how having this central brain orchestrating every single human in the loop and learning from those humans can start unlocking maybe intelligence that we haven't even architected for, because it's just learning from the data and the intelligence that comes out from those two cross-linkage intelligence, if you will. The last thing I would say is this is a very critical thing that we see the successful AI transformation companies do versus the ones that are going into pilot purgatory, as we call it, which is a lot of pilots but no real scale production output. And that is what I call persistent organic learning. What I mean by that is, I think it's very important for startups that you guys are driving not to be in a perfectionist mindset at this point. I think what's very important is to be in a pragmatic mindset. Let me give you an example of that, right? What I mean by pragmatic is, if say you have a real world in the wild productivity unlock with the agentic deployment of 80%, what it effectively means is 5 times the throughput. I'll repeat that, 80% accuracy, which is 4 by 5. And what therefore it means is, if you were to enable every human to become superhuman with that AI, every human would be 5x of what they were earlier in terms of productivity unlock. And that's meaningful, isn't it? And that's what pragmatism gets you. It gets you a starting point, may not be perfect, but a starting point that means reasonably well in terms of operating efficiency. And from there on, what's really critical is this continuous improvement loop. How do you create these feedback loops and reinforcement learning suites such that every usage, every correction that's happening pipes back in, and then the journey from 80% to 100% happens automatically with usage. And that's probably the tactical switch that we've seen successful AI transformation companies do today. Now these are either startups that are starting in an AI native world that we are in, and equally there are large enterprise companies that we work with that are trying to shift from their erstwhile way of looking at businesses to the future way of operating, right? And now let me just switch that learnings that I've just painted, which are patterns that I've seen across almost 11 years of working with companies and looking at how to apply AI for the purposes that we spoke about in the why, right? And I think that's where India AI Mission really is doing a phenomenal job. A lot of credit to the entire government of India, starting from the Honorable Prime Minister to the Minister Ashwini Vaishnav to Abhishek Singh sir and his team, who's focused on every single stack of AI layers, starting from energy down to the applications, and equally creating the infrastructure that's required. Think of data sets, for example. There's an AI course today with about 7,000 plus data sets the last I saw, and the number keeps growing every time I check it. And equally, if you were to look at the compute part, right? You can have a Ferrari, but if you don't have a fuel, what's the point of owning one? And I think compute is in a way the fuel for the Ferrari that we're building. And the government has done a phenomenal job of having a sovereign ability to provide that need at scale. And with that, I think there's already a foundation. What we are doing as a part of the India AI mission is to start connecting these dots. They're brilliant pillar stones that are already in place, and we're trying to see if we could do what we call it UAI, Unified AI Interface, but I think the easiest way I can explain to you it is UPI for AI. How do we connect all of these dots such that, say, someone who doesn't understand machine learning at its depth can still be able to actually have real usable intelligence in their day-to-day lives, right? And eventually that should probably all tie back to the Viksit Bharat 2047 shared purpose that the Honorable Prime Minister has given all of us as margdarshan, in lack of better words, right? With that being the end goal, how do we unlock, say, $1 trillion of economy contribution from AI by 2035? And that's where each one of you would probably have a very, very important role in the years to come. So let's switch from maybe what I've learned so far in the last 11 years to what I could pass on, say, so that you can then take it to the startups that you're working with and incubate them in ways that are more apt for the future that we are getting into. The hardest part of AI is not intelligence. I think this is a misnomer that exists. It's today very, very straightforward for someone who spent 2-3 years in AI to be able to build a model. The real challenge is execution. And in execution, you'd see that the three hard truths that each one of your startups will encounter. The first, I would say, is data. Data is usually unstructured in the real world, and in many cases, it's not even clean. And so what happens is a lot of iterations is simply go into getting data into a format that can be converted into intelligence. And the crazy part is this is being done in silos, and a lot of redundant works happening by multiple startups, for example, trying to solve the same base problem with different attempts at this data. I think India AI Mission is doing a great job, but equally incubators like you could start thinking about how do we collaborate rather than compete on such underlying foundational data lakes, if you will, that think about PDFs, for example, in a particular domain. All you need is certain PDFs in that particular domain, and everyone who's probably working in that domain can benefit out of that little bit of a data set, right? I think that'll probably be a DPI focus for India AI Mission, but if you guys can join hands with Niti Aayog and AIM, I think there's a real opportunity for making some sort of a standardization and eliminating a lot of redundancy that's happening today. The second thing that I think is very important for startups is the pilot to production scale. Creating a model, putting it out in a sandbox environment is very, very easy. Showing an accuracy of 98% isn't rocket science. You can literally fake the benchmarking studies by keeping not unseen trajectories but seen trajectories, and suddenly you'll see the accuracy rates being very, very impressive, right? And you can benchmark yourself against the state-of-the-art model out there and say, I'm better. But what happens is when you really go into real-world scenarios, which is a real workflow where a human's really doing some mission-critical work, you would notice that the edge conditions and the boundary conditions would bring a model that claims 98% in the sandbox down to less than 25% accuracy in real life. What I mean by that is, when you deploy this, your employees would say, you know what, yeah, it's doing 1 out of 4 perfectly right. But for the rest of the 3 out of 4 that I need to get involved in, I end up putting more effort correcting than I would if I were just doing all 4 myself. And that's the real world challenge that it starts spitting out, right? And so you have to be super careful on not looking at accuracies. Instead, look at real world deployments, do user acceptance testing, not in a particular sandbox environment benchmarking with other models, but actually giving it to users, real users, and seeing what is that true dollar productivity unlock, if you will. And that's a very important aspect where I think incubation would be an important aspect. It takes time, and you will have to plan for that time. Last, I would say, is trust is a feature. I see this being made by a lot of early stage startups today. Trust cannot be an afterthought. Safety, ethicality, and some of those aspects are going to be more and more important in the years to come. And the best winners in any particular vertical specialization would probably equally lead on this third bullet as much as they would lead on productivity unlock. And I'm sure most of you would be hearing the OpenClaw Molt action that's happening in Twitter. If you haven't, please do look at it. And it only further increases the importance of this bullet that I'm talking about. And how can you actually help, right? The execution and support on this would be, I think, critical for you to be able to unlock the AI native business models that you would want to see say 10 years down the lane. And the real bottleneck, as I said, is access to high quality data. I think there's an opportunity for you to partner with India AI Mission, leverage whatever is being put out there. It's exceptional, government funded, high quality, cleaned up, structured data. And as long as you can find something there, please do not reinvent the wheel. It will save you a lot of time in the time to market rules that you're looking for. Creating safe data sandboxes in case there are industry specializations, let's say one of you are focused on, try to figure out where are those data sources, kind of consolidate them for your own footprint of portfolio companies, right? And there's, as I said, a lot of redundancy today in the world, and hopefully we'll all come together to remove that redundancy, and that itself, I think, is a huge unlock. Pilot to production, I think the real goal is not demo days. We all have to evolve from demo days, which has been the flavor of AI for the last couple of years, into production scale systems that have real dollar, measurable, quantifiable impact, right? So real buyers, real constraints, real accountability, the procurement cycles. Eventually, what would be best for you to guide your startups is to say, I don't want to look at a demo or an accuracy benchmarking. What I really want to see is users in a real live production user acceptance testing saying, man, this makes my life so much better. And if you could actually quantify that, that would be amazing, right? And the last is, as I said, trust is a feature, not an afterthought. A lot of work happening in the DPI side. Very important for all of you to leverage that, and hopefully in that process, we get to a point where we really succeed. Time check? Okay. The last thing I do want to leave is, honestly, there is a shift needed. I think happy to do this offline with any specific questions that you guys need, but we need to move from demo to deployment. As a nation, I think there's a huge opportunity, not just for build in India for India, but there's probably a big opportunity for build in India for the world. And if we don't make that shift, we'll probably not be in the right competitive benchmarking. Collaboration over silos, don't reinvent the wheel, leverage what's available, build what is differentiated. And last, as I said, laser sharp focus on impact. I would probably end my presentation here. We won't win this race with building smarter chatbots. I think it's time that we elevate it to solving real problems for citizens at scale, real problems for MSMEs and enterprises in India, and equally, I think, real problems for governance in India. And I'll end at that note. Thank you very much for your time.